think it's all set on my end. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Eternal Void, but with Jazz podcast. Today, we are talking to the wonderful Maevius Lynn. So, Maevius Lynn is a writer, artist, international lecturer, and ceremonial magician who currently resides in the southern United States. Her work approaches Thelema as a living tradition from the perspective of both a solitary practitioner and an initiate of the Ordo Templi Orientis and the Temple of the Silver Star. She is particularly interested in getting people to practice magic and not leaving it as a niche interest relegated to history books. Her efforts inspire others to make Thelema and magic a purposeful part of their lives. Her work includes YouTube and educational videos, online study groups, workshops, and lectures at pagan and occult conferences, books, magazine articles, and art. As part of this work, she especially enjoys collaborating with educators and content creators of various traditions, building bridges of understanding and inclusion around the living tradition of Thelema. Maevius Lynn is also the author of the upcoming book, The Holy Year of Thelema, a guide to the ritual calendar of Aleister Crowley's tradition, currently on pre-order and set to be released in May of this year. So hello, Lynn. Thank you so much for joining us and for coming on to the podcast. Michelle and I are so excited to talk to you today. And how are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you so much for the joy and honor to be here today to talk about things I love, including not only my tradition, Thelema, but magic in general and what that means. So I think we have a real treat in store for listeners today.
I definitely agree. I've been looking forward to this episode all week, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this with our audience. So thank you for coming on. I think we should just sort of jump right into it. So for our audience listening in, this might be their first time hearing from a Thelemite. So even though they might have heard the term Thelema, they might know of Aleister Crowley, they might not really know, like, what is Thelema? So why don't we just start right there? Can you tell us a little bit about what this practice is?
Yeah, I think starting at the beginning is a great place to start. So, um, I had a wonderful introduction to me personally, and my particular tradition is something known as Thelema, and it is what I would call a philosophy, for lack of a better term, a cult religion, as well as a system of mysticism, that the backbone of which is made up of these core holy books, which were channeled. And In terms of what it has to offer is, yes, it is a tradition that has organizations associated with it, but you don't need to initiate into those organizations to participate in Thelema. As a practitioner of Thelema, the term I would refer to myself as is a Thelemite, and that term actually comes from our central sacred holy text, the Book of the Law. And I'm excited to not only have an upcoming book, but also be on the internet, on my YouTube channel and such, really just sharing my tradition and encouraging people to get out there, do magic. And you don't have to buy everything hook, line, and sinker to borrow some of our magic or from our tradition. And believe it or not, when I when I look at all of the magic being practiced today, whether it's Wicca, chaos magic, if you're using the tarot, a lot of our original holy texts and a lot of our foundational beliefs and stuff makes it into a lot of the magic and occultism you see today. So you may already have a little bit of Thelema in your practice already and not know it.
Ooh, that does sound fun. Yeah. So like with that in mind, like what would you say are kind of like the core practices of Thelema? So like what does a Thelemic practice like actually look like in kind of like a day-to-day life situation?
Sure, it's going to be very different depending on the individual. So if you're an initiate of some of our teaching order known as the AA, you're probably perhaps going to have a little bit structured day, or you're an initiate of Ordo Templi Orientis or something like that. But you'll find the same sort of similar rituals and structure for solo practitioners as well. And I will happily get into those rituals, but I'm going to pause and first define what makes a Thelemite. And this is an ongoing debate amongst Thelemic practitioners today. And we have a lot of modern practitioners defining a Thelemite in increasingly broad terms, so broad that it's like, okay, everyone in the world's now a Thelemite based on this definition. And that's not helpful, right? And then we have, on the other end of the spectrum, we have people defining a Thelemite as people who do this very rigorous amount of tasks and, has read this, has done this. And it's so narrow that it leaves off people who really should be under the umbrella of Thelemite. And so then the question is like, well, who gets to be a Thelemite? First of all, you don't have to be born into this tradition. And the definition I really like comes back to Grandmaster Sabazius of Ordo Templi Orientis in the United States, the US Grand Lodge, if you will. And to paraphrase him, he says a Thelemite is someone who seeks to know and do their will, and someone who accepts the book of the law and what it means to them. And I think that's a fantastic definition because it captures the myriad of different ways different individuals from different backgrounds experience this tradition along their path. And the core idea here is, we have this thing called true will. Everyone has this divine spark within them. And the idea is to go along this spiritual path, trying to figure out what that is or what that may look like. And along your path, that could take a really amorphous form to maybe something more exact as you kind of narrow down understanding yourself. And then once you have that understanding, that divine spark along your spiritual path, then it becomes taking those magical tools to doing your will. And so that's the general idea there. Now, some of our elders in our tradition, including some of the OG people, including Aleister Crowley, put out some examples of how to do your will. Like he took fantastic notes, and people know the name Aleister Crowley, but I want to also remind people that our tradition just isn't one man. It's not a cult of personality around Aleister Crowley at all. There was women from the very inception of the original book. Rose Edith Kelly, who was Aleister Crowley's wife at the time, was the reason the Book of the Law came into existence. And there continue to be, from the very inception of the AA, people of all different genders, all different races, sexualities, were involved in that order. Same with Ordo Templi Orientis. So these voices shaped what is Thelema today, and that's really important to remember. And in terms of some examples of women and what they have done along their path, we have a great example with Phyllis Seckler. She's a very prolific writer and very big on social justice. Really pushed the idea of socioeconomic justice in particular and accessibility to people of all economic backgrounds. But she left behind some fantastic diaries, as well as Jane Wolfe. So those are just some example of notable Thelemic women. There's so many I could get into. But yeah, we can look to people that came before us for inspiration. But I truly believe at the end of the day, it's your own path. And so if you're someone who comes from, culturally a different background, and you might be using different spiritual practices, different tools, for example, I use tarot, to maybe for a while I was doing a daily tarot pool. But if you're someone who comes from a tradition where you're more familiar with throwing bones or crystal gazing, your daily practice might look like that along the journey to know and do your will. So that's a very long-winded way, and I haven't even gotten to what my personal practice looks like. So now that I've really captured how different practices can be, for me personally, I'm a little bit more of a traditional Thelemite in that I follow some of those who came before me, and some of the practices I do is one called Liber Resh Vel Helios. It's a daily solar adoration at the 4 stations of the sun, so sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight. You do this little ritual, the solar adoration. And then also for the main meals of the day, I do something similar in structure to saying grace. It's called saying will before I eat. And that just brings in an extra step of mindfulness into eating. So those are two types of rituals I do, at least in theory, every day. Um, but then, of course, I have my yearly celebrations around our holy days. So a lot of celebrating that. And I'm sure we'll get into that later. But, I have a lot of yearly celebrations. And I think that, also depending on the year, depending on what kind of occult working I'm doing. Right now, I'm scrying the Enochian Aethers, taking a lot longer than I was hoping to, but anyone who's worked the Enochian system of magic, I'm sure they can sympathize. And, it just really depends kind of where I'm at and what I'm doing. So I think that sort of paints a picture of what my daily practice looks like.
That is a fabulous answer. Thank you so much for that. I really think, like that's a great introduction to what Thelema is and, like what it can be, and that it's not just sort of one thing, like one static thing. It is very much like a living, breathing tradition. And you can really bring your own, influences into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. Michelle, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I think that was phenomenal. And I really I want to circle back around to some of the stuff you said regarding like women in Thelema and socioeconomic justice later.
Yeah.
But my question is like, I guess more of like a personal nature at the moment, but it also goes straight to your book. Like as someone who has read a lot of Thelemic and Thelemic adjacent texts and authors from, just all over the spectrum of the last like 100 years, I have never once come across the concept of a Thelemic holy day. And
Mm.
I'm really excited to hear about the Thelemic holy days because I think there's maybe a lot of people who would also want to know about them. So, like, yes, please, let's talk about the Thelemic holy days. And I'm probably going to interrupt with some questions as we go.
Yeah, let's dive right into them. So, the Thelemic holy days are not a new concept. They were there from the very inception of Thelema in, as we talked about before, the Book of the Law, the central sacred holy text that was a channel text received by Aleister Crowley with the help of his wife at the time, Rose Edith Kelly. They were on a honeymoon in Egypt, and so they channeled this text. And one thing I want to be very clear here before we dive into like what those days are exactly, is what do I mean by a channeled text? So for those of us who have done some occult work and scrying or channeling, we have a sense of what that means, but not everyone has done that before. So a channeled text is something where, you hear the term automatic writing, so that may ring some bells for people, but essentially the words are flowing through you from a different source. And people have different beliefs around where the source of information comes from. For some people, it's God. For some people, it's the gods, plural, or the divine, the one source. For others, they believe it's a spirit, external from themselves, but not necessarily a god. For other people, they believe it's a deeper part of the subconscious mind speaking. So I just want to acknowledge the diversity of beliefs around that and say that in our tradition, it's open-ended. It's up to you as the person to decide. And I always say, I believe this. As you go along your spiritual path, your beliefs around whether atheist, agnostic, deist, polytheist, whatever your beliefs look like around that, I do believe they possibly will change. And it's a reflection, I believe, of where you're on the path. So it's very open-ended. Please honor what you believe there. So this text, the Book of the Law, is not Aleister Crowley speaking as himself. So Aleister Crowley is not the author of the Book of the Law. The author of the Book of the Law is an entity known as Aiwass. And there's a lot of beliefs, again, what Aiwass is. Some people believe it was, again, a part of Crowley's subconscious. Some people believe it was Crowley's holy guardian angel. Just some examples. And so
if I may interrupt for
yeah.
just a second, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it actually his wife that did the channeling?
She was the inspiration for it. So I'm happy to go into this story. So this
Yeah, I
is
would
what
like to.
happened. Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion around it because it wasn't just like a one-off event. So the event started, you know what, I'm going to take it all the way back to Rose Edith Kelly and spend a little time on her because I
Please
think
do.
she's very interesting. So Rose was not a practicing occultist. She was, however, a woman of notable, status at the time in Victorian society. So she had a wealthy family, some status, and she was a widow. And so after her, you know, loss in her life, she kind of became, she embraced, let's just say, her freedom. And she was seeing a lot of men when she was a widow, and including some married men. And during this time, to kind of paint how wild of a figure and woman she was, she at one time told her parents she was pregnant. And her parents were absolutely shocked that she got pregnant, possibly by a married man out of wedlock. And so they gave her money to get an abortion. And she used that money to buy herself new dresses. And she was not pregnant. She lied because she wanted money for dresses. So that was Rose. She was wild and out there living. And her parents had enough of her at one point. They're like, hey, you need to get married. You need to pick one of these male suitors and you need to marry. And unfortunately, Rose did not want to marry the men she was sleeping with, any of them. Possibly, I believe she was very interested in a married man in particular, but that wasn't going to work out as a marriage prospect. And so her family was essentially forcing her to marry to chill out. And she's like, no. Well, it turns out her brother made a friend in college. And one day, her brother's friend, also known as Aleister Crowley, was coming to visit. And so, they were all kind of hanging out at Rose's home with her brother and, young Aleister. And she was kind of talking about her dilemma and how she wants to continue to live life according to her impulses, her freedom. She doesn't want to give that up to another married life. And Aleister Crowley, also sort of a bohemian, free thought kind of gentleman, also a very openly queer man at the time. He was like, hey, I don't really know you, but if you get married to me, you can still see who you want. You can do whatever you want. And so it can be a marriage of convenience where we're married on paper, but we can go our separate ways. And she's like, you know what? Let's do it. And so Rose and Aleister Crowley eloped. They just went and got married. And then everyone was shocked and like, oh no. And so while Rose and, both of them were expecting to kind of go separate ways after the marriage, they actually fell in love. They fell deeply in love, had a very passionate marriage. And they eventually took their honeymoon in Egypt. And again, Aleister Crowley's really into this magic stuff, and Rose was not. And they eventually stayed the night and at the base of one of the pyramids. And Aleister Crowley, in order to kind of impress her, he's like, hey, why don't I do a ritual to evoke some air sylphs? And so Aleister Crowley, and so for people who don't know air, there's different classical elemental beings associated with the elements, and for air, it's sylphs. And so Aleister Crowley did this ritual for the sylphs, and they didn't show up. It was kind of a failure, at least according, what seemed like on the surface. But afterwards, Rose started saying, hey, I think someone's trying to talk to me. And Crowley was like, that's weird. Tell me more about that. And so she was claiming that an entity known as Horus, or spirit using the term Horus, was trying to talk to her. And here's a footnote for occult folks who've worked with spirits or entities. People forget that the rules of our world are not Hollywood movie rules for spirits. Spirits can and do lie. Or if it's not lying, they will use symbols at their convenience. So an entity, a spirit, a deity, if you're surrounded by Egyptian stuff and that's on your mind, they might be borrowing those symbols. So I don't want to tell someone what to think about that, but that's just an idea. So here they are. And so it's like, okay, well, it's funny because Crowley's like, I don't really think you know who Horus is or any of this stuff. So they went to a museum and he's like, point out Horus to me. And so she does. She points out this Egyptian stele in the museum, which was number 666, which is not associated with the devil and the Golden Dawn tradition or sort of this. The number 6 is actually associated with the sun. It's a solar number in this tradition. And it was also interesting because for Crowley, he grew up in a very fundamentalist Christian background. So it wasn't just the solar connection to 666. It was also like, oh, my mother used to call me the beast growing up as a child. And that's kind of interesting. I'm seeing all of these things kind of come together. So he eventually decides to do something called the Supreme Ritual. So Rose, in her like, Horus is trying to contact me, she wrote down a bunch of instructions to contact this Horus entity. And I say Horus in quotes here, because again, whatever that means to you. So she wrote down these notes. Crowley interpreted those ritual notes, and he wrote something up based on her suggestions called the Supreme Ritual. And so Crowley did the Supreme Ritual, and from that, he learned that there was actually a cosmic event going on known as the Equinox of the Gods. So, long-winded, but we're getting there. We're almost there. So the Equinox of the Gods is associated with the astrology. So this idea that every 2,000 years, so 2,000, anyways,
it's 2,000.
Yeah. 2,000, thank you.
Yeah.
I know there's like a fraction in there, but I don't want to try to remember the fraction.
Yeah, no, anyways, we could round that off. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So, basically on the equinox, based on the wobble of the earth, you cycle through the astrological signs. And so there's a shift going on cosmically, referred to in this tradition as the Equinox of the Gods. And basically the idea was divine rulership was shifting over to a new set of rulers. So instead of humanity was coming out of the age of the Osirian formula, also known as the age of the dying god, and into something called the age of the Aeon of the Child, or the Aeon of Horus. So previously, the magical formulas of the Old Age associated with Abrahamic religions, meaning Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, relied heavily on this idea of self-sacrifice and giving yourself up to be closer to the divine. So this idea of sin, of restriction, of, self-sacrifice. So dying God, if you will. Versus moving into the Aeon of the Child, which is, again, this thing happening, right? This Equinox of the Gods, where it's more about self-realization, self-actualization, a childlike sense of wonder and freedom, grasping your individual identity and holding fast was then the new magical formula. So it's like, wow. And so during this contact, the entity was like, hey, your work's not done yet, Crowley. Here's some instructions I want you to do in the coming 3 days. And the entity told Crowley, I want you to sit down at noon for 3 consecutive days and take notes. And that's essentially what Crowley did, is he went into a room, he sat down, and he wrote what flowed through him from an entity known as Aiwass, and it produced a book of 3 chapters. And each chapter was a different entity, if you will, speaking as a source of the divine. And I could talk forever about how this book, also known as the Book of the Law, or Libera Vel Legis, is fascinating. There's stuff in there Crowley didn't understand, but other people figured out. There's stuff in there that speaks to the human condition. There's philosophy in there that's sort of a reaction to Buddhism, because Aleister Crowley was a Buddhist at the time. And
I found some stuff in there personally that was very Jungian.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. And so what does that mean for our listeners, someone who's like just discovering this tradition? Well, you have to understand, if you were to pick this book up, it's very poetic, it's very beautiful, but it's hard to understand because it's not a person speaking, right? It's a channel text. It's sort of not stream of conscious as much as it's just flowing out. And so the best way to understand this book is, of course, in reference to Aleister Crowley's writings on it. So Crowley gives the context of like what these things mean to him. So these could either be parts of his subconscious or the parts the divine used to piece together this message from Crowley as the hand that wrote it. So he was the megaphone, and they could only turn it up to the volume that Crowley could handle. So there's things that mean things to Crowley that he tells you what they mean. And the best book is something called The Law is for All. And that's basically Aleister Crowley's commentary on it. And so I would like everyone to read a good bit of poetry, including the Book of the Law. But I also recognize it's a very hard read because it is a channeled work. But fortunately, you know, Crowley wrote some more accessible things as himself, not just these channeled works. And we also have some wonderful modern authors as well who've unpacked this in a way that's more accessible in modern vernacular. Some of those authors include Lon Milo Duquette, David Shoemaker, Richard Kaczynski, and myself, Maevius Lynn. So that's a wild ride. I hope I got to some good points.
No, you really did. And you answered a lot of questions about stuff I didn't know, and just kind of, you know, piling on to what you said about reading the Book of the Law. I definitely think should be assigned reading for everybody who's even like slightly curious, like even like not understanding, but like, you know, the first time I read it, like maybe just understanding like one or two passages of those 3 chapters, they were still powerful passages.
Oh,
right.
absolutely.
And it's not a long read, and you can kind of pick up more each time you read it. I found another one of the channel text, Liber LXV, the Book of the Heart girt with the Serpent,
Beautiful,
to be very
beautiful.
similar. Beautiful, beautiful work. Yes, I need hardback copies of both of those, but I found those texts to be texts like gifts that just keep on giving as you come back to them each time in ways that are extremely, you know, I found a lot of peace in them. A lot of like, a lot of inner peace. I definitely would just pile on to everything you said there. Now, speaking of famous authors that have unpacked all of this, you've got a book coming out.
Yes.
Now that we've laid the foundation, tell me about some Thelemic holy days.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, so that book we just talked about, Liber Alva Legis, has a part that's very fascinating. And it calls for humans, all of humanity, to celebrate certain holy days or holidays. And it calls for people to celebrate them not only on the yearly cycle, but also moments of our life. And I think all of us can relate to possibly experiencing holidays, whether a birthday, you know, Christmas, you know, Hanukkah, whatever the case may be. A lot of us are exposed to holidays. And so one of the first questions people ask when they enter a new religion or a new tradition is, what holidays y'all got? Because honestly, the points of time that someone celebrates really is a nice gateway into what the values of the tradition are. And I really feel like it's true in the case of Thelema. And so another thing is I see a lot of conflation of sort of this milieu of magical, occult, pagan traditions with Wicca. And I just want to make the distinction here that Wicca is a separate tradition from Thelema and a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
What happened is this Book of the Law came out, and eventually a gentleman by the name of Gerald Gardner, he got to know another gentleman by the name, a much older Aleister Crowley.
And don't forget he knew Grant as well.
Yeah. So Gerald Gardner got to know an elderly Aleister Crowley. He was heavily influenced by Crowley's writings. He even got a charter to open a chapter of Ordo Templi Orientis from Crowley. But also, if you look at Gerald Gardner's original Book of Shadows, it's just copied word for word, tons of Crowley stuff. And there was actually a college paper that did a comparison to these original Thelemic texts to like what was in Gerald Gardner's Book of Shadows, and it was a very surprising amount of text. And wow. that's what a Book of Shadows is. It's a cookbook, right? And so Gerald Gardner was cooking with Thelema heavily. And so it makes sense that some of these holy days of Thelema, some of them, key word, made it into eventually what Gerald Gardner created, known as the Wiccan Wheel of the Year. And
Right.
so, just to get everyone up to speed here, let's talk briefly about that, because a wheel has even spokes. In the case of Gerald Gardner, he made 8 spokes. There was the solstices, the equinoxes, and then the cross quarters, making these 8 even things
Mm-hmm.
through the turning of the year. And then he took and assigned borrowing from a lot of different traditions. And he filled in those, I don't want to say gaps, but he filled in what he felt was meaningful into those slots of the Wheel of the Year. So that's kind of what's going on there. Thelema is quite a bit different. We have this channeled text saying, hey, this is important. And what that text calls us to celebrate is the solstices and the equinoxes. However, the cross quarters are not in there. There's no cross quarters. We do have 2 additional ones, and this is unique to our tradition, which is the first night of the prophet and his bride. The short colloquial version of that holiday is Beast and Bride Day. You may hear that. And then
Never, but I love it.
Yeah, and then our other holy day is a 3-day one, which is the 3 days of the writing of the Book of the Law. It's important to note, we call them the solstices and equinoxes. We don't have those extra terms like Gerald Gardner used. So when we celebrate the winter solstice, it's just the winter solstice. We don't have Yule in there. Of course, again, Thelemites are so diverse. So you may see a Thelemite celebrating Christmas. You may see a Thelemite celebrating Yule. That's amazing. That's awesome. But I really focused on Thelema as a tradition only. And that's what we got cooking, is we got these days, associated with the, equinoxes, solstices, the 3 days, and Beast and Bride Day. And then it also calls for us as human beings to celebrate points in our life. And so I'm going to spend a moment talking about that as well.
Yes,
It
please.
it calls for us to celebrate our birth. Our feast day is, being born, of course. Then it calls to celebrate something called a feast for fire and a feast for water. This is celebrating puberty. Now, let's unpack what that means. Our text does not strictly have a gender binary or any of this sort of black and white thinking. And I think what's also important to remember, because people project a lot of stuff onto traditions they don't understand, so let's just get this straight. Aleister Crowley was super queer. This is the guy who channeled all of these texts, Not only was he living out and proud with, lovers and partners of all genders, he was also genderqueer himself. Now, genderqueer is a modern term. Crowley did not use that term, but Crowley did go by the name Alice in correspondences at one point and did identify using she, her pronouns. So,
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So there's a lot of queerness from the very inception. So when we approach ideas like puberty, that could be very off-putting to some people. And I just want to say there's nothing imploring you that you must absolutely celebrate this. Just take, if it speaks to you, take it, if it does or if it doesn't. So a feast for fire is associated typically for boys, and a feast for water is typically for girls. But what does that actually mean? Specifically in Thelema, when we talk about these metaphors of gender, it doesn't actually mean physical flesh gender. It's talking about abstract spiritual concepts. In this case, it's transcendence versus eminence. And for those familiar with the Kabbalistic tree of life, that's another helpful tool for you to kind of conceptualize this. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but I think it's a little important just to kind of dip our toes into it a little bit here. And the idea here, moving up this spiritual path in a Thelemic context, is balancing opposites. And so, because truthfully, nothing is really an opposite. It's all gray, including us spiritually. We have light, we have dark. And so The idea is to move closer to the divine, move closer to God or the gods. And part of that path is reconciliation of opposites. So we talked about atheism, right? If you are a hard, steadfast atheist, the call in our tradition is to balance that with belief and faith a little bit. If you are a hardline believer in the gods, of hardline polytheist, the call is for you to balance that with a little bit of atheism, because the idea is on our path. Well, I'm going to use a term maybe people don't recognize, but above dot, above the abyss, closer to God, all things are one. So atheism, polytheism, all the same thing. Agnosticism, it's all the same. So this also goes for characteristics of us as human beings, as individuals in the world. So if you're a really fiery person, the idea is to balance that with a little bit of water. If you're, really airy, maybe a little bit of grounding. So the idea is whatever you have going on, balance that, and reconcile those opposites, including the light and the dark, all of that, all of that into one. So let's get back to this idea around puberty. That's going to mean something so different for everyone, right? So if you are someone who's genderqueer, for example, and my book gets into this, I offer a myriad of explanation and ideas, right? These are just inspirations. And if you're genderqueer, maybe you want to celebrate a feast for fire and a feast for water. Why not both? Have them both for you. Have a reflection of you on your path. If you're someone who transitions later in life, you might be having a second puberty. Use that. That's going to be your feast for fire or your feast for water. Celebrate as many puberties as is applicable to you as on your path. This is about you. So, and also for our people or gender non-conforming friends, maybe this doesn't speak to you at all, and that's absolutely fine if this isn't something you want to do. All of this are just ideas to play with and use as you see fit. And so then, of course, we have a greater feast for death. In our tradition, the death is also celebrated. And this can be rolled into, funerary rites, but in Thelema, it's not a solemn occasion. It's an occasion to celebrate one's return to the absolute all, return to whatever was reflective of your beliefs, and celebrating the person's life. And also overcoming our own fear of our mortality and fear of death, and combating that with joy and reminding us of the joy of incarnation. So that's a little taste of our life celebrations as well.
That is so cool and so different from what I kind of imagined the Thelemic holidays to be. And I just love how so expansive and inclusive and customizable it is. It really is something where you really do make it your own. And I just think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I love that. That's what I'm all about that. And we do have a lot of modern Thelemites who say, hey, I actually really like the cross quarters. And so one of them is a gentleman by the name of Dionysius Rogers, and he actually did write a book about the cross quarters, but he has rituals for the cross quarters as well. He calls them the Feast of the Dragon, stuff like that.
Oh, cool.
But nobody, for some reason, wrote a book of ritual and explanation around our core holy days yet. So I did. It's the only book of its kind, and it's so funny because when I wrote this book about our tradition and all, it's not just my rituals, by the way. I went to great lengths to represent diverse members of our community and to share their rituals and how they celebrate. But it's funny, when this book came out, everyone said, why didn't I write that book? And I said, there's still time. You write your book. I want more holiday books. Even Lon Milo Duquette, for people who know him, his comment, because I sent him the manuscript ahead of time, his comment back to me in all caps was, why hasn't someone already written this?
That is funny. It's like one of those things that's so obvious that everybody just overlooks it and assumes somebody else is going to grab it. So that's amazing. Go you.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's not lost on me that I believe the one of those holidays that you name that's very particularly Thelemic, the celebration of the channeling of the Book of the Law, happens in early April, if I remember correctly. So that's kind of coming up. That's a 3-day holiday. What does that look like for Thelemites?
Yeah, let's talk about the 3 days of the writing of the Book of the Law. So it's really, you captured it. It's a celebration of these 3 chapters that were channeled over the course of 3 days. And as far as Thelemites go, that's one of our big holidays where people go buck wild for. So I think the biggest ones are for Thelemites, the spring equinox, because that's also our new year. And that's also another, ooh, this is different moment, is we have a Thelemic calendar. A lot of religions have a different calendar system, and we do too. Which I also talk about in my book. So if you want to start writing your dates in a really weird way, you can figure that out in my book. So the 3 days is what it sounds like. It's celebrating the channeling of this text over the course of 3 days. Typically, how Thelemites celebrate that is we meet at noon, or individually we take a pause at noon during that day and we read through that corresponding chapter to that day. Typically out loud if possible. It's a beautiful time to take a pause. My husband and I would often take like a nice little hike somewhere in nature and then just pause, read the chapter at noon. And of course, when I say noon, there's different types of noon. There's like by the clock noon, the time, and then there's also something called solar noon when the sun is at its very peak. Regardless, I mean, people do different stuff, and we all have lives, right? So sometimes people can't read it at noon because they're at work, they have things going on, and so just people sometimes in the evening get together, have a nice meal, and then read the chapter together. It's also a time that modern practitioners came up with rituals around the 3 days. And so if you have a concentration of Thelemites celebrating these holidays, you can do a group ritual. And in terms of what's available in my book, not to bring it always back to my book, but just to kind of illustrate some ideas, I offer really low effort or minimal amount of time activities to do to the very, expansive, lots of people involved. So in terms of like examples of like shorter time frame kind of things, I think it's very traditional to read the corresponding chapter at noon if you can. If you don't have time for that, just simply stepping outside and feeling the sunlight on your skin, taking a deep breath, experiencing the present moment, acknowledging that, and then moving about your day. You can do, a walking meditation. You can hold a mantra throughout, your day or in a moment. Even if you have time to like eat a meal outside, that's also a beautiful thing, just to connect to the sun in some way. And then I also offer for all of the holy days, some altar work. So let's talk about altars in Thelema for a moment. I think people would want to know about that. So we do have altars, traditionally speaking. Typically, they are something called a double cube altar. It's 2 cubes stacked on each other. Typically, you often see them as black cubes, black wood boxes stacked. But in terms of what a lot of, eclectic witches and pagans might associate with an altar to a deity, we don't really have that traditionally, actually. But obviously, those can serve a purpose. I love a great personal altar to a deity, to spirit, whatever that looks like. And I offer a little bit of altar work for each holy day, something that I do. So, for example, an altar to the 3 days might look like a copy of the Book of the Law. Maybe you have your 4 elemental weapons. So that would be your wand, your dagger, your disc. And did I forget one? Wand, dagger, air. Oh my gosh, cup. Goblet or cup. Goodness. So you have your, 4 elemental weapons, your Book of the Law, and, maybe taking time on each day at noon and lighting a candle, saying a prayer. That's a beautiful thing you could do. Maybe to celebrate some of those Thelemic energies, have some fresh red roses on the altar as well. That's another beautiful thing. So not only is Rose Edith Kelly's namesake the rose, but the rose has so much deep significance in our tradition. When you look at our OG symbol, which is the universal hexagram, in the center is a 5-petaled red rose, or a rose, and that's symbolic of the pentagram, the elemental pentagram with spirit on top. So, there's a lot of things you can play around. And then, of course, for people who have a group and want a little more, want to do a little extra time, I have a beautiful group ritual from a few practicing Thelemites who performed this at a Ochio lodge. I'm blanking on where. Let's just doesn't matter where. It's in my book. I promise I cited it properly. But, they celebrated the 3 days with a group ritual in the evening. And I go into, what you need, wise in terms of temple space, implements, ritual wear, all of that if you want to do that. So yeah, just some ideas of how we celebrate that and how you can celebrate that.
That's
Yay.
amazing.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like this is an awesome time to ask you, what is your favorite Thelemic holiday?
Well, thank you. I do love the 3 days of the writing of the Book of the Law, but I have to choose. Well, all of them are very cool. Um, I think the winter solstice is one of my favorites, but I have to choose the spring equinox.
Ooh.
I think the spring equinox is my favorite, and that's because there's so much going on. There's so much. It's like a triple holiday for us because not only is the spring equinox, right? Like, equal night and day, and the sun is growing from that point. It's also our New Year, so it's a New Year celebration and all of the fun festivities that come with it. And it's also the equinox of the gods. And remember that supreme ritual I mentioned?
Yeah.
The supreme ritual and equinox of the gods is also celebrated on the spring equinox. So I guess it's actually four things we're celebrating all at once. And so it can be a real blowout holiday. Something we do traditionally is at the equinoxes, so the fall and the spring equinoxes, and this is a tradition that goes back to Golden Dawn, but also other, secret societies. But we do this in Thelema as well, is we try to take the magical temperature of the next 6 months. And we do this by pulling, at least I do personally, pulling a bunch of different oracles at this time. So my husband and I, and whoever else wants to join us at the time, every equinox, we sit down and it's like time to take the temperature of things to come, basically. We do oracle cards, we do tarot, we do bibliomancy, we do the I Ching, we do geomancy. Am I forgetting someone? I think that about covers our most of what we do every single year, twice a year, and we write our results, and then we see if there's a pattern in those results, and we see if that pattern reflects something in the coming 6 months. So that's something I look forward to every year.
That is
Wow.
really cool.
A lot. It's
Yeah.
very different, and what a cool opportunity it is to share this with you all and to share this with a wider audience, because the truth of the matter is, I mean, you mentioned like, wow, not many Thelemites around, and that's so true. It's a very small niche within a niche within a niche, and a lot of people talk about us. Not a lot of us talk. Not a lot of us are given a platform, and so you hear people get things profoundly wrong about us all the time, and people speak for us, but they don't actually take the time to actually find out about our traditions and our beliefs. But I think there is some really cool, very different, and very unique things in this tradition that I think would resonate with a lot of people.
I think so too. And I would definitely agree with you. I do have like one, I kind of want to dive into that. And it's maybe not like the happiest question I could ask, but like in my experience, and definitely in some others' experiences who were like at a time possibly interested in pursuing like proper initiation in
Sure.
like a Thelemic OTO lodge, what ultimately stayed my hand in that, and I know
Yeah.
that I'm not the only person who's encountered this, is more than a few Thelemites who are rather publicly Thelemic, male identifying, who seem like they could give zero cares about like socioeconomic issues
Mm.
or gender issues, to the point where it almost like came off as very off-putting, right?
Yeah.
And I guess my question would be like, what would you say to like people who are interested in Thelema but were maybe put off by that face that some people in Thelema, that mask that they would wear, that's a little bit scary.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought this up because this is such an important conversation to have. Um, I've experienced that. I know what it feels like. I have been through those same trials. And the first thing I would say to everyone is if you feel a calling and you feel like you want to be here, you deserve to be here, period. No, no other questions. This is a path for all. But, you know, if initiation through organizations does not have to be a part of your path, but again, if you desire that, you also deserve that 100%. So let's spend a moment to talk about the Thelemic landscape and why things may be so weird, but also so distorted on the internet. Because I assure y'all, the loudest on the internet do not reflect the actual in-person community. At the end of the day, these are secret societies. Now, I mentioned Jane Wolfe and Phyllis Seckler, two women I admire tremendously. You know, it's no secret. I was initiated in Temple of the Silver Star, which is in the current of so back up. Let me back up. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about what our community looks like right now. And the two big organizations are a fraternal organization, sort of like the Masons. The technical term is paramasonic, meaning inspired by Masonry, and that's Ordo, Templi, Orientis. This was founded in Germany. People like Karl Kellner and so forth. Aleister Crowley was not a founder of the OTO. He was a notable member, though. And when Aleister Crowley ended up in a leadership position in OTO, he did restructure the OTO to be in line with the teachings of Thelema, and sort of that kind of, group of mysteries are taught through the initiations. Now, the OTO is actually, at least in the United States and other parts of Europe, modeled after the United States model, the exception being Australia. But let's just talk about the most case scenario. It's actually two organizations under one hat. There's the mystery sort of initiation secret part that's very Masonic, like a Masonic style initiations you would go through. And so you would learn lessons through this sort of ritualized play. And then there's the church arm or the ecclesiastical arm of the OTO. And that offers a very, ecclesiastical Gnostic Catholic, it offers the Gnostic Mass. And unlike sort of other secret societies, the Gnostic Mass, at least the public ones, are available to all people to come and experience that ritual. So you do not need to be a member of OTO to come experience that. And then if you want to get involved in the church, you can pursue baptism, you can pursue confirmation, and then eventually, if this calls to you and you end up in it, you could serve in the role of priest or priestess, etc., deacon, all that stuff. So all that church stuff is there if you want it. All that Masonic initiatory stuff is there in OTO. The other organization which was established directly by Aleister Crowley, is something called the AA. Now that is not Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the teaching order associated with Thelema, and that is not the same structure as OTO. That is a one-on-one student-teacher relationship. And it's like drinking from a fire hose. You go fast and you go quick and you go hard. It's you learn a lot very quickly. Now, because of lawsuits and the way politics and life has worked, there's only one OTO in existence right now, right? There was legal decisions made. There are now several different AA lineages in existence from Crowley. Most of them trace their lineage back to Aleister Crowley himself. And with each lineage of this AA organization comes different beliefs and different flavors. Even some of them operate slightly differently. Is one better than the other? I think it's really up to the individual. You're going to get different perspectives, some are more progressive than others, for example. I think some of the more progressive ones do trace themselves back to Phyllis Seckler, for example, because she was very concerned about issues of, social justice, women's rights, feminism, accessibility. And so From her, we get several AA lineages, including some other organizations, which are in between AA and OTO, in that they are in service to the AA, but it's not like the fire hose of AA. So we have, for example, associated with Eshelman, we have College of Thelema, and then associated with David Shoemaker, we get Temple of the Silver Star, and that's where I come in. So I was initiated in Temple of the Silver Star. I had an amazing experience with the people there, and I don't think I'm telling things out of disrespect here, but most of the people who initiated me were women.
That's
And
awesome.
how cool was that? Was I was able to show up and be initiated into this Golden Dawn patterned order by mostly women and have an incredible experience. Very affirming, very beautiful. Learned a lot. So yeah, I think I covered a lot. So anyway, if someone is interested in any of those organizations, do not let a few mean people stop you. I personally have had a very negative experience locally with OTO, and I had to take a step back because it was very toxic. That happens, right? Like an inappropriate person gets into a position of power and it becomes a bad environment for someone to be in. And if that's the case, I encourage people to step away. That being said, I've had very positive experiences with OTO at other local groups and other places. OTO national and international is incredibly forward thinking, very supportive. I've had a lot of helping hands from people who just saw my passion and saw that I felt a greater calling, and they chose to help me. And I've found plenty of kind, considerate, passionate people, creative people in all of these myriads of groups, despite there being, occasionally a bad actor or two. And then, gosh, what a long-winded answer. But
No,
I
this
have
is
another.
perfect.
This is a great conversation.
Okay, great. I have another thought here, and it's like, why do people get so weird and dark in Thelema? And that's a different question, right?
Yeah.
And I think about this a lot because I've experienced it. And the truth of the matter is, Thelemic magic and our system of mysticism and all of this stuff is very powerful. Period. It just is. You will, if you choose to, you can always sort of dip and dabble and not step fully on the initiatory path. But if you choose to take that step on the path of the great work, as you will, your life's probably going to change. It just is. And it will possibly change dramatically, and it will change you. And the goal is to use these tools, and there are many, to change you in a way that makes you more whole as a person, closer to the divine. That's the goal. And it will. It will change you dramatically and powerfully. And that's sometimes called for. I know it was in my case. I needed a powerful tool to reshape me, and I got it. But like all things, it can reshape you in the wrong direction as well. It absolutely can happen. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of all of that. I actually talk a little bit about this in my book. But suffice to say, a powerful tool can be yielded in both ways, the good and the bad. And when it is taken into the bad, you end up with someone who's destabilized, very egotistical, and as dark as in the absence of light, sort of like a black hole type soul, sucking in all of the light around them in service to their own ego, instead of projecting light in service to the world, which is what people should be doing on this path eventually, is projecting light in service to humankind. That's what should be happening. And one of the things that can help you not end up as an ego monster, for lack of a better word, is having some community feedback. It doesn't have to be other Thelemites, but something where you can land and touch down and ground yourself. And it does help in the initiatory context to have a good teacher.
Yes.
Um, I'm very blessed that I had David Shoemaker as a teacher and Lauren Gardner, amazing people who've influenced me to be a better person in a good direction. But there's a lot of good teachers, a lot of good leadership out there. It's just about being selective and finding them and avoiding the ego monsters, I suppose.
Yeah, no, definitely. I kind of see it as like a train with a lot of stops, and some people get off at the wrong exit, and you just got to kind of like keep going on the train because eventually you'll get there. Right.
That's a great metaphor. That's beautiful.
Okay. I appreciate that because I wasn't sure if it was, yeah, the right one to go. But yeah, no, that really, that helps. That helps a lot. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been so, and I'm not going to say enlightening because I happen to be staring at a candle on my desk, but it has been enlightening. Um, Thank you. I know we like to keep things at about the hour mark for everybody's comfort. And I think we're about there. Gabby, was there anything else you wanted to ask? I know all of my questions have been answered. Also want to shout out your YouTube channel. Just on
Oh, yeah.
I know you've talked about it, but I specifically watched your video on the Aeon
Oh, cool.
earlier this afternoon. And there's so many questions I want to ask right there, and maybe we'll have you back on some other time. But
I'd
I
love
would
to.
I would just for right now recommend that video to anybody of nearly any experience level. At least watch the video. You may not get everything, but there was a lot of great stuff within that video. And also particularly, I love the way you ended that video. I don't know if it's how you end all of your videos, but with a particular sign off. What was that sign off again?
Yeah, so it's I am the center of expression for the primal will to good, and so are you. And yeah, that has a it's a reference. So because I have been initiated into secret societies, I have a lot of hat tips. Without spoilers, I have a lot of hat tips to other initiates, and you may hear and experience things in my book and in my videos that if you choose to go on this path, whether flying solo or initiated, you'll be like, hey, wait, Lynn mentioned that before, and your world will be so much wider. So the center of expression for the primal will to good is a reference to a pattern on the trestle board that is used in Boda, which is a group by the name of Builders of the Adytum, which is one of the spiritual successors of Temple of the Silver Star. So one of the exercises that is done in Boda is this pattern on the trestle board, moving up and down the Kabbalistic tree of life and associating these phrases with that spiritual map. And that is one of them that I have modified for my YouTube channel.
I love it so much. It really rang true to me, and as a target to aim for. And I really,
Wonderful. Good.
yeah, that was amazing.
Yay, yeah. This was a phenomenal episode. And I feel like, just walking away from this, I've already learned so much. So I'm so excited to actually pick up your book and get all the rest of the context and all of the little details. Because, yeah, like I feel like Thelema, like you said, is so misunderstood. It's so easy for, internet to kind of make it seem like it's one specific thing. So to kind of get a more well-rounded perspective from somebody who's actually part of the tradition is, such a treat and such a privilege. And I just want to thank you again for coming onto the show and for sharing your knowledge with us, sharing your experiences with us, and introducing us to your book and Thelemic Holy Days.
Wonderful. It's been a joy and a pleasure. Thank you so much, y'all. And my YouTube channel is Maevius Lynn. Whatever. My username is Maevius Lynn on YouTube. And come check out my videos. I not only talk about subjects, I also give demonstrations of a ritual. So if you want to try on a Thelemic ritual, I not only explain to you what every part means and where it comes from, I actually demonstrate it from start to finish. There are some various variations of different rituals. I teach it from my particular initiated teacher and tradition with my flavor, but yeah, they're there. So you can try on Sang Will, you can try out Liber Resh Vel Helios. I have actual demonstrations, also pronunciations on there, so you can get the words right. And I also read through some of our holy texts, and that's an ongoing project to put some of meaningful occult texts into a read through for people to listen to. One of my favorites on there is Thunder Perfect Mind, which is a Gnostic text. So a lot of people do like AI stuff, and I think that's super low quality and unpleasant. I actually read it out loud. So if you're interested in that, go check out my YouTube channel.
It's
I
a
love
great
Thunder
channel.
Perfect Mind.
Yes.
That's one of my favorite texts. So I'm gonna have to check that one out for sure.
Cool.
Amazing. And tell us again, when is that book out?
May 8th. So pre-orders are out now, and it'll be available at basically anywhere books are sold. It's already out on Llewellyn's website, but you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, even on Walmart, Books A Million. It's all there. And I'm hoping it reaches the right audience and in the right hands. I'm just so excited to see this tradition and these tools make it to a wider audience that previously these rituals from all of these members of the community had never been published before from all of these people, and it is just chocked full of good stuff that I think people will really benefit from.
That's awesome. And you chose a charity for this episode. Do you want to talk about that, or would you like us to?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Could you remind me what that was?
Oh, the Audubon Society.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
I'll edit that part out.
So I am so excited to talk about the charity I chose, which is the Audubon Society. There are so many amazing charities you could be giving to at this time, but one of the ones I find particularly meaningful, and I have seen real work on the ground from this organization, is giving to species preservation and protection and preservation of birds, but also education of folks from children to adults over time to appreciate and love nature. It's no secret that I am a lover of birds, and especially their connection to the divine. All throughout different human cultures and human history, birds are considered the messengers of the divine because they fly between the heavens and earth. This is often talked about as them speaking the language of angels, or the language of birds. Throughout the old grimoires, birds are considered, omens, or deliver divine messages. You can do a bird augury, similar to how you try to, ask a question of any other type of augury. The birds can answer it for you. And then, of course, all the beautiful benefits that coming from our connection to nature in this world. I truly believe the closer you are to nature, the closer you are to the divine. So, like all things, when it comes to nature, birds are threatened, and they're at risk of being lost forever. And so I think it would be truly a huge loss to say goodbye to our feathered messengers from the heavens, and we'd lose a part of ourselves. So I love supporting a charity that not only educates people about these beautiful creatures, but also helps preserve them for many, many generations and people to come. So please consider donating and participating in the Audubon Society.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. This has been another episode of The Eternal Void, but with Jazz. And we were talking with Maevius Lynn. Thank y'all, and have a wonderful day.